The particulars given in the form number 3CD are true and correct. This much was very much there already in the existing 3CA 3CD. Subject to the following observations, qualifications if any. This part has been modified. So now in form number 3CA 3CD, earlier also it was there but in some other format. But this specifically gives a place where we can put our qualifications. So whatever 3CD reporting we are done, if we are there is a dispute between the assessee and the auditor as to a particular point, a debate on a particular point, assessee is taking some different stand, mainly maybe for example in case of a disallowance or maybe in 14A case where a CA may go for that rule 80 formula, assessee may quantify that disallowance of 14A in some other manner, and there is some debate between the assessee and the chartered accountant itself, or there is some qualification in the books of account. There is a statutory place mentioned in form number 3CA 3CB. We can insert our qualification in this particular form. This is the only change in 3CA 3CB. Coming to 3CD. As mentioned earlier, there were 32 clauses and now there are 41 clauses. So some of the clauses remain the same, some of the clauses numbering has been changed because of some new clauses inserted in that, and some of the clauses have been additionally inserted. In this brief PPT, I have considered those clauses where there either has been some change or some new clause has been inserted. Clause number 4 seems to be a very simple clause, but perhaps it might also harass the tax auditor like anything. Whether the assessee is liable to pay indirect tax like excise duty, service tax, sales tax, custom duty, etc. If yes, please furnish the registration number or any other identification number allotted for the same. As far as the second part of the clause is concerned, it is very simple, stating the registration number. But as far as the first clause is concerned, the auditor is required to comment whether the assessee is liable to pay indirect taxes. It's a very difficult position for a tax auditor to comment on this, whether the assessee is liable to pay. Because liability to pay taxes of many indirect taxes, the tax auditor who is conducting tax audit under the Income Tax Act, he might not be that much expert. Sales tax perhaps is understandable because majority of the tax auditor also do a sales tax practice. But we may not be, perhaps tax auditors of income tax may not be aware of the intricacies of other legislation, especially excise duty. So whether a particular activity done by the assessee amounting to manufacture or not, whether it is liable to excise duty or not, the clause is not saying, had the clause, the wording of the clause been in that, where the assessee is liable, state the registration number. That would have made our life much simpler, that simply we have to ask the assessee, take a MRL from them, that if you are liable, give us the registration number of services, you would have put it. But the wording says whether the assessee is liable. So the tax auditor is required to find out the liability under the other acts, and he has to say whether he is liable or not. If he is liable, then he has to state the registration number if any obtained. Clause number 6, previous year in relation to which tax audit is conducted is required to be mentioned. As such, we might wonder what is this new in or amendment in this clause. Previously also this clause was there, but it was mentioned as previous year and we just used to put the year, that is 2014-15, for example, in current scenario. However, the new clause says we have to mention from which date to which date. Per se, it should not also create any problem. 2014-15 from which date to which date, then we will say 1st of April 2014 to 31st of March 2015. However, technically, why they have inserted this from this date is, the previous year defined in Income Tax Act is the year preceding the assessment year, and however there is a proviso in that definition which says that in case of a newly commenced business or in case of a new source of income coming into existence, the previous year will start from that particular date. So generally in case of a running business, previous year will start from 1st of April only, but if a new business is set up say on 1st of October, then the previous year starts from 1st of October, it ends on 31st of March. So even though it might be a broken part of the year, but it still remains by definition a previous year. And now because they are requiring us to mention the dates, we'll have to keep this in mind, especially for the new business who are subjected to tax audit which is commenced during the year. We need to mention indirectly the date of commencement of the business. And this information might be useful for them for perhaps disallowing the expenditure prior to that particular date, holding them to be a pre-commencement expenditure or a capital expenditure. Then coming to clause number 8, the relevant clause of section 44AB under which the audit has been conducted, this has to be mentioned in that new 3CD. I have mentioned here which are the particular clauses of 44AB. 4 clauses of 44AB which require tax audit to be done. First one for business having turnover more than 1 crore. Second one professions having turnover more than 25 lakhs. Third one is covering cases of 44AE, 44BB and 44BBB. 44BB covers who are involved in mineral oil extraction and 44 triple B turnkey power projects. We may not be concerned with those two provisions in our day-to-day practice, but might be 44 AE and the last one 44 AD. These last two, clause C and clause D, will cover a scenario where, for example, assessee is carrying on a transport business 44 AE and he claims his income to be lower than the amount specified in 44 AE, that is 4,500 for other than heavy goods vehicle and 5,000 for heavy goods vehicle per month. Or the lastly 44 AD, where the turnover is below 1 crore. As per 44 AD, the minimum profit to be mentioned is 8%, and if the assessee claims that profit is less than 8%, then even though the turnover is less than 1 crore, he is required to get his books audited. So that particular clause is to be mentioned in clause number 8. Coming to clause number 11B, details of books of account maintained and the address at which the books of account are kept is required to be given. Now this details of books of account maintained, this clause was already there in the old 3CD. The new requirement is the address at which the books of accounts are maintained, and if the books are not kept at one location, the addresses of all the locations along with the details of books of account maintained at each location is required to be given. So we will have to find out where the assessee is maintaining his books of account, and the addresses of all those places are need to be mentioned. For clarity's sake, I reproduce the definition of books of account in section 2 clause 12 of the Income Tax Act. It includes ledgers, day books, cash books, account books and other books, whether kept in the written form or as printouts of data stored in a floppy disk, tape or any other form of electromagnetic data storage device. In my humble submission, it's a very strange definition, and in current scenario, a wide stand perhaps can be taken. But in many cases, in fact in almost all the cases, books of accounts are kept in electronic format and rarely we take out the printout. And if you don't take the printout, as such actually you have not maintained the books of account. Because the definition of books of accounts includes ledgers, day book, cash book, etc. and other books, whether kept in the written form. So either it should be in handwritten form or it should be kept as a printout of data stored in electronic device. So merely keeping the books of account in electronic format is actually you have not maintained books of account. You need to preserve the books of printout of those books which are kept in computerized form, then only actually you have maintained the books of account. If we see the direct tax code which was proposed to be introduced, then subsequently amended, again amended, and then I don't know where it is lying right now. But in the direct taxes code, the definition of books of account was wide and it covered electronic records. The existing definition doesn't contain the electronic record, it only says printout of data stored in any electronic storage. However, these books of account, because now we are required to mention also the place where these books of accounts are maintained, the definition becomes vital. Maybe the stand which I am taking might be a very adventurous stand. So we may take the stand that even if it is stored in Tally or some other package, then where the particular PC is maintained, then that is the place where the books of account are maintained. It might create some problem in an ERP scenario where the books are in cloud or in the server. Then we need to mention the address of the server where the books of accounts are maintained. And if then that server gets access to various branches of the assessee, probably we need to mention the addresses of all the branches. The branches have access to that books of account, that means even those branches books of accounts are kept. However, books of account do not include the supporting documents. There is a separate clause 11C which speaks about what are the documents which we have examined. And books of account definition doesn't include those documents. For example, the sales bill of the assessee. Sales bills per se are not the books of account, they are the documents on the basis of which books of accounts are kept, and therefore we need not mention the places where such back office the documents on the basis of which books of accounts are prepared. So we need not mention where the sales bill or purchase bills are kept. We need to mention only the place where the books of accounts are kept. So the next clause 11C, this is a new clause. The relevant documents examined along with the books of account is required to be given. So we need to give, and perhaps probably this list will be quite a large list, the documents which we have examined. And in the interest of the assessee, in fact it will be better in the interest of the assessee as well as the tax auditor that we make this list a very large list. Whatever we have examined, relevant document, we must mention in this particular clause that these are the books, documents which we have mentioned. Otherwise later on after 3-4 years at the assessment stage, if you have missed out something in this, department will probably take a stand that you have not examined this particular document. Assessee might rely on that particular document, but if it is not mentioned here, they might take a stand that this was never examined by the auditor, and therefore he might reject the tax audit report, he might reject the books of account also. And perhaps they will complain to the institute, and a disciplinary action might be taken if a particular vital document is missed out by the auditor. We might have actually verified it, but if we forget to mention it because it's a new clause, if we do not mention it, there is no proof that we have actually verified that particular document. Clause number 12 for tonnage tax scheme may not be that much relevant for our practice. 13C. Details of change in the method of accounting employed in the previous year and the effect thereof on the profit and loss account needs to be mentioned. This clause was already there, only they have maintained the prescribed format in which we have to give this information, serial number, particulars of the change, and the impact we have to quantify in two different columns. How much increase in profit due to the change in method of accounting and how much decrease in profit due to the change in method of accounting. Similar change they have done even in clause number 14B. Any deviation from the method of valuation of closing stock prescribed under section 145A, and the impact again in the same format, increase in profit, decrease in profit. This particular clause might perhaps trouble us, not as much as the previous clause, because generally assessors do not change the method of accounting, and therefore the preceding clause may go back, where we have to quantify the impact in terms of increase in profit and decrease in profit only in the scenario of change in the method of accounting. But this particular clause number 14B, it is not dealing with change in method of valuation of stock, but it says deviation from the closing stock method prescribed under 145A. Now if you go to 145A, what 145A says, that valuation of closing stock, sales, purchases, etc. should be as per the method of accounting regularly employed by the assessee, and the later part of 145 says it should be further adjusted to include the value of any taxes, etc. which are incurred to bring the goods to the present location and condition of the goods. That means indirectly, for example, sales tax. The closing stock should be inclusive of excise duty, sales tax, etc. That is the statutory requirement of section 145A. The 145 there is no amendment. Previously also this was there. Now if you see the accounting standard 2 given by the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, AS2 speaks about an exclusive method. Therefore it says whenever credit is available of an input tax, for example VAT paid, and because a credit is available and therefore that need not form part of the closing stock. So AS2 recommends an exclusive method, whereas 145A requires an inclusive method. But see, there is no change in AS2 scenario, there is no change in 145A. Change is there only in the reporting requirement. Otherwise previously also this clause was there, and that clause used to say that we have to quantify the impact of 145A. And the guidance note on tax rate issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, they had a particular paragraph on this 145A, and they said if 145 is revenue neutral, in fact it's the Institute's stand that 145 is revenue neutral. If we add tax amount to opening stock, simultaneously we add to purchase, simultaneously we add to sales, simultaneously we add to closing stock, then the profit remains the same if we take it as per exclusive method. There would be some difference, but that difference they say, if you debit that difference, the problem will arise in case of closing stock, where including valuing the closing stock as per inclusive method. If that closing stock is sold before the due date of filing return of income, and that VAT is paid before 43B due date, then even if we recast our profit and loss account as per 145A, it will become revenue neutral. But if the goods are lying in stock till the due date of filing return and income, goods are not sold and that much VAT is not paid, then even if we recast the profit and loss account as per the guidance not given by the institute, we do addition of VAT in opening stock, purchase, closing stock everywhere, and the differential closing stock VAT payable if we debit it on the P&L account, because of 43B it might get disallowed and then it will not be revenue neutral. Now in most of the cases where the stock is not that much high, and if you practically apply 145A, 145A will really be revenue neutral. Until now, generally tax auditor used to mention in this particular clause that we are relying on so and so paragraph of the guidance note issued by ICAI, according to which the this impact of 145 is revenue neutral. However, now the report is first of all in E format. Secondly, it requires you to mention it in this format: increase in profit, decrease in profit. So particularly it might be perhaps interpreted in two scenarios. If we again take the same stand that 145 is revenue neutral, that means increase in profit is same as decrease in profit, perhaps we might not mention anything here. But the another stand could be taken that you quantify both, on the debit side and on the credit side. By credit side how much profit increases, and debit side how much profit decreases. Net effect might still be zero, but the reporting requirement will remain. Clause number 17. Because of introduction of 43 CA by the Finance Act 2013, similar to section 50C. Now 50C is a very simple section and everybody is aware. If we deal in any movable property, we are selling any movable property and the stamp duty value exceeds the agreed consideration, then for computation of capital gain, they will replace the actual consideration by the stamp duty value. However, 50C applied only for capital assets and therefore builder developers were out of the stamp duty benchmark. Last year they amended and introduced section 43CA, which says that even in case of stock in trade, if the agreed consideration is less than the stamp duty value, then for computing business income, stamp duty value has to be taken. Now a reporting requirement in clause number 17, it says 43CA as well as 50C. If there is any transaction in land or building or both, and the consideration is less than the stamp duty value, then we have to mention this particular information in this particular format. Actual format is actually a little bit lengthy. They also mention there is a clause for address of the property. So we have to mention the details of the property, then complete address of the property, and then what is the actual consideration and what is the value adopted as per the stamp duty. This information is to be given in tax audit format, and you must be aware even the written format this year they have changed. For this AY 1415 written also they mentioned they have inserted this particular clause where we have to mention that stamp duty value as well as the agreed consideration. Now this particular clause might create a serious problem in case of builders, because as far as 50C is concerned, 50C is attracted at the time of transfer of capital asset. However, as far as builder developers are concerned, they might follow a project completion method, they might follow a percentage completion method. The wordings of 43CA says when there is a transfer. So 43CA, the one interpretation will apply only when there is a transfer. So if a builder is following a percentage completion method, so he is offering profit on an estimated basis as when the project is progressing, and there is no actual transfer of the property, perhaps he might argue that 43CA does not apply to him in that particular year. It will apply to him in the year in which the actual transfer takes place. But there is another angle to it, that in that scenario 43CA will become useless if you are following a percentage completion method. You are offering income every year, and in that year you take the stand that 43CA does not apply. It will apply in the year of actual transfer, and in that actual transfer you are offering only a part of the income. So another controversy will arise that addition should be only for that pro rata part which we are offering in that year. Logically speaking, it should not happen. The spirit of the section is that whatever is the unaccounted, or sorry to use the word unaccounted, whatever is the gap between the actual consideration and stamp duty value, if it is going to be taxed in case of general investors or general individuals, then why not in the case of builder? They should also be taxed on that particular gap. And with that spirit, they have inserted 43CA. But for the tax auditor, this is going to create a problem as to how much to report, whether it should be reported percentage wise, whether it should be reported cumulatively in the year of transfer. One more angle to it, that the definition of the word transfer itself is not there in the income tax act. Transfer is defined in section 2 clause 47, but that applies only to capital asset. In case of builder developers, what they are selling is stock in trade, which is excluded from the definition of capital asset. Therefore, per se the definition of clause 247 might not apply to builder developers for the purpose of 43CA. And for stock in trade, they have not defined transfer. Then perhaps a realistic or a better practical approach would be to interpret transfer in 43CA in general sense. And in general sense, if a builder has agreed to sell the property, and in that scenario it should be taken as a transfer, and therefore it should be reported in this particular clause. There is one more angle to this particular clause number 43C and 50C that I will take later on along with section 56 issue. Clause number 19. There were certain deductions under section 35 series which were specifically mentioned in the old 3CD. For that we have to mention how much amount was debited in profit and loss account. For example, for scientific research where we get a weighted deduction. Earlier also there was a requirement how much is debited to P&L, that we have to mention, and how much is allowable as per the respective section we have to mention. There are two changes in this particular clause. Firstly, there are four sections which have been added. One is 32AC, which deals with investment allowance. In fact, in this year budget it has been amended also. Earlier the threshold for investment allowance was very large. New plant and machinery more than 100 crores. Now they have come out with one more incentive. New plant and machinery worth 25 crores and more. So that investment allowance is added. Then 35AD. 35AD is a section which contains certain specified businesses for which even capital expenditure is allowable. Initially, the list contained 8 businesses, and 2 years back it amended. It contains 11 businesses. Current budget also 2 businesses are added. So right now there are 13 businesses specified in section 3580, where we get deduction 100% for capital expenditure incurred, and that is to be reported, because as per the accounts that capital expenditure will be reflected in balance sheet and not in the P&L account. Therefore, the auditor needs to report how much is, if any amount is debited to P&L and how much is actually allowable. 35 CCC and 35 CCD might not be relevant to our average client. CCC deals with agricultural extension project and CCD deals with skill development project. So this is one change in this particular clause, addition of these 4 sections. Another change is that auditor is also required to comment on fulfillment of conditions specified for the claiming of those deductions, and conditions not only specified by the Act but by any rules or any other guidelines, circular, etc. issued for the purpose of that particular section. For example, for the purpose of 35 CCC, there are guidelines prescribed in Rule 6A, and 6AE. So auditor has to also comment on whether the conditions specified in those guidelines have been fulfilled by the assessee or not. Clause number 20B, contribution received from employees for provident fund or other welfare fund. Earlier also this reporting requirement was there. They have given now a specific format. In this format we have to give this information. This speaks about employees' contribution and not about employer's contribution. Now employees' contribution, whatever is deducted from salary, by fiction created in section 2 clause 24, it is firstly taken as income of the employer. Correspondingly, we get a deduction under section 36(1)(5)(a) if that amount is deposited before the due date. Now 36(1)(5)(a) explanation, if we read, it refers to due date mentioned in the PF Act. And in PF Act gives the due date of say 20 days from the end of the month. However, as far as employers' contribution are concerned, they are covered by section 43B and they get disallowed only if they are unpaid by the due date of filing return of income. So technically there is difference between 36 employees contribution due date and employers contribution due date. Employees contribution allowable only if it is paid by the due date mentioned in PF Act, but employers contribution allowable even if it is delayed by PF Act.